Hello and welcome to another history revision video podcast. This time it is Society 1951 to 1964. Let's start off by looking at demographic change. Britain in 1951 was still moulded by World War II. Things like war damage, rationing and national service. We also had big differences in class, determined by your accents or how you dressed, and this was reinforced by radio and various other media. The welfare state had caused a lot of social change. Higher life expectancy, for example, both inward migration and outward migration. Where and how people lived had changed. And the difference between the town and the country became more defined and sharper. Having said that, there was a strong sense of local identity and belonging to your community. There was a rise in both social mobility and actual mobility with the advent of cars and motorways. And this changed society with the drift into the suburbs and a hollowing out of the city centres. In railways, the Beeching report destroyed 30% of railways, as cars were seen as cheaper and more flexible form of transport, and this left many rural areas isolated. After the war, infrastructure and housing needed rebuilding, and that links with the 300,000 houses that the Conservatives promised to build a year, and did build every year, and also created more new towns on greenfield sites in some occasions. Throughout this period there was always more people emigrating out than coming in, although this was becoming more equal a number by the end of the 1960s. So let's have a look at immigration. It's not the biggest or most significant factor, says Chris Rowe, but it became of intense social concern. There were close links with the people coming in because of empire, and those ties had been strengthened during World War II. The influx of immigrants caused social tension almost immediately after it began, with the Empire Windrush in 1948, and by 1958 about 210,000 Commonwealth immigrants had settled in Britain, mainly from the West Indies, but also from the India-Pakistan area, and these were concentrated in urban areas, which proved to be a problem. The authorities saw immigration as economically desirable, as they filled the low-wage jobs that were in short supply after World War II. And under existing law, the newcomers had full rights of British citizenship, and this further stimulated immigration when that news got sent around the Commonwealth and the Empire. In 1958, the Notting Hill race riots altered perceptions of immigration. There were also riots in Nottingham, Bristol and other poor parts of London. There were incidents where both white people went round beating up black people and vice versa, but the Salmon report into it treated it very much as a law and order issue caused by the white reaction to increased immigration, and they ignored the racial aspect of it and the racism involved. After 1958, immigration speeded up, and government policy changed, leading to the Commonwealth Immigration Act in 1962, which limited immigrants through work permits. The public attitude to immigrants mixed, through racism, i.e. the no dogs, no Irish, no blacks sign, and rumours of them coming just for the welfare checks, but there's also a feeling of tolerance and getting along on many occasions. Main difficulties arose over accommodation, due to the concentration in cities where accommodation was scarce. White people thought the black people were squeezing them out, as black people were more accepting of worse conditions and cramped conditions where they could share the rent, and in a lot of occasions they were willing to share with lots of other young men because they went there with their families. Let's move on to violence, criminality and hooliganism, and this has been linked to immigration, partly by unfair and inaccurate reports about immigrants and their criminality. However, a lot of it was homegrown. There was a youth subculture developed because of the unwillingness of some young people to accept the standards and the values of their elders. Teddy boys were breaking the previous norms of law-abiding behaviour by the 1950s, and although crime had risen during the war because of blackouts, the black market, social dislocation, etc., between 1951 and 1955 crime had dipped again. But then after 1955 it rose sharply, with the mods and the rockers and the craze being two high-profile examples. This was all happening at a time of affluence against the background of national service, so it seemed to some people to be inexplicable. However, the affluence caused a feeling of independence for young people on good wages with time to spare. And conversely, there was also pockets of poverty causing bitterness. Again, young people were the first not to have lived through World War II, and so they were encouraged to feel special and different. And the scandals that they saw hardly set a good example to them. Plus, the satire boom undermined respect and deference, so it's little wonder that young people, started to break the social conventions and also break the law. Moving on from young people in society to young people in school and education, the 1944 Education Act had attempted to provide a tripartite system, but it hadn't really worked, as only a handful of technical schools were established, and secondary moderns became seen as a place for failures, after failing the 11+. Grammar schools were providing successful secondary education for working class pupils, says Lynch, And under comprehensive system, all wealthy parents could do would be to move to a good school area, so that therefore the selection would be by wealth rather than ability if they changed to a comprehensive school system. On the other hand, many saw the 11 plus exam as unfair and inefficient, with lots of psychological strain on kids and parents. Plus, all the funds went more to grammar schools, and records showed that bright pupils performed just as well in comprehensive schools. The Labour MP Anthony Crosland was particularly against grammar schools and began to work on plans for comprehensive schools. Edward Boyle, the Conservative Educational Secretary, also wanted to get away from the 11 plus. And under Boyle, the Conservatives had commissioned the Robbins Report, which led to a massive expansion of higher education in a bid to emulate other countries, such as the USA. Its main provisions were expansion of existing universities, emphasis on scientific education, the 12 CATs, the Colleges of Advanced Technology, were advanced to official university status. Larger grants were to be given to students so they wouldn't be deterred by the lack of income and not go into university. Finally, let's look at the attitudes to class in the culture of the time and the media. In 1951, Britain was a deferential and conformist society with ingrained respect for authority. Class loyalties were strong in political parties. By the late 1950s, there had been a shift in attitude. World War II had already weakened class divisions. The welfare state had shown the well-being of the whole country was important, and affluence across the classes blurred their distinctions. The availability of financial credit meant that anybody could now buy ostentatiously, not just the upper class, and Suez had exposed the lying and manipulation of government. Organisations like CND from 1958 encouraged the challenge to authority, and trends in culture and the media led to a more individualist and less conformist society, less willing to follow the establishment. To define the establishment, you're talking about the informal networks that connected the social and political elites, the privileged white males that were in the charmed circle and knew the people who mattered. This could include lords, judges, barristers, bishops, generals, senior civil servants, and many more like them. And wealth is less important than the background and connections, their schools, for example, and universities. The left-wingers in the Labour Party had battled against the system and tried to abolish private schools to make a meritocracy, as well as reforming the education system to give everyone who was able a chance. The satire boom emphasised the change in attitude to class and showed a lack of respect, a shocking lack of respect even, for those in authority. For example, Beyond the Fringe, the satirical stage show with Peter Cook in it, and the Private Eye magazine. Finally, the Profumo affair demonstrated the fact that the press had become less deferential and more intrusive. And as time went by, over this period, TV became less cosy and less reassuring, and more gritty and realistic, dealing with social tension, like immigration, for example, in 1964, by the end of the Conservative period. There's also a drive to break down censorship and social taboos like sex, abortion, homosexuality. A good example of this is Lady Chatterley's Lover, which was published in 1962 and ended up as a high-profile court case. There was, however, a backlash by middle classes against this depravity, Mary Whitehouse being the famous figurehead. So let's have a look at some historical interpretation on this. Realists say the Beeching Report was necessary to get rid of the railways because they were not cost-effective. Romantics say they went too far. Labour opposed the 1962 Commonwealth Immigration Act, but they didn't repeal it after 1964, which is quite telling. Chris Rose says the class system was dented by 1964, but certainly not broken. Michael Lynch says some Conservatives were anti-comprehensive, but the party itself had accepted that this form of schooling would be the best. And they were in office when the comprehensive schools appeared in the 1950s, and actually created more comprehensive schools over the period of our course than Labour did. This is another prime example of consensus, and the political post-war consensus of the parties agreeing. Lynch also says the advocates of comprehensive schools were merely fighting a class war, or some people have actually said that they weren't bothered about the schooling, they were just trying to fight this class war. Lynch says the key to the social shift was the availability of financial credit, and he believes that is the most important reason. Rab Butler himself claimed that the modern conservatism was ending class differences. Derek Murphy says, in effect, during the 1950s, they, the government, neither controlled migration into the country, nor did they attempt to combat the rising tide of racism. He also says the teenage rebellion seemed more extreme in a society which was dull and conformist. And Arthur Marwick, the famous British social historian, says British society by 1963 seemed to have broken out of the straitjacket of dullness and conformity. That's it for this one. I will see you next time with British foreign policy in 1951 to 64.